Keberangkatan masuk Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia dan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Menghadap ke bawah duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Cancelor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Menghadap ke bawah duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Aisyah Rohani binti Almarhum Tunku Besar Mahmud. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik bagi pihak pengurusan tertinggi dan warga Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua berangkat mencemaduli menghadiri syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz pada hari ini. Sesungguhnya, keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua merupakan suatu penghormatan kepada seluruh warga Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Ampun Tuanku. Patik seterusnya memohon limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik meneruskan atur-cara majlis serta mengalu-alukan hadirin sekalian. Ampun Tuanku.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Yang amat berhormat Datuk Seri Utama Haji Muhammad Haji Hassan, Menteri Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, dan Yang Mulia Raja Datin Seri Salbiah Tengku Nujumuddin, Yang amat mulia Tengku Besar Seri Menanti Tengku Ali Ritaudin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang amat berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji Abdul Hamid, Pro-Chancellor UKM, Yang amat mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang mulia kerabat diraja, yang berhormat ahli-ahli Majlis Mesyuarat Kerajaan Negeri Sembilan, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Dr. Ibrahim Saad, Pengerusi Lembaga Pengarah UKM, yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Utama Arsyad Ayub, Pengasas Kelab Alumni Universiti Aberystwyth di Malaysia, yang berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Naib Chancellor UKM, dan yang berbahagia Datin Zarina Mahmud, Div-Div Kehormat, Ahli Jawatan Kuasa dan para alumni Kelab Alumni Universiti Aberystwyth di Malaysia, ahli-ahli Lembaga Pengarah UKM, timbalan-timbalan Naib Chancellor dan pegawai pengurusan utama UKM, warga UKM, serta hadirin dan hadirat yang dihormati sekalian.
Syukur kita kehadrat Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala kerana dengan izinnya kita semua dapat hadir di syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz yang akan disampaikan oleh Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Seri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz sebentar nanti. Majlis mengambil kesempatan untuk mengalu-alukan kehadiran div-div kehormat di majlis yang permai ini. Seterusnya, majlis mempersilakan Yang Berusaha Dr. Abdul Rahman Mahmud, Ketua Pusat Islam Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, untuk memimpin bacaan doa. Dipersilakan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله الذي لا ينسى من ذكره ولا يخيب من دعاه ولا يقطع رجاء من رجاه. الحمد لله الذي من توكل عليه كفاه ومن وثق عليه لم يكله إلى أحد سواه. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق والناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم وعلى آله وصحبه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. اللهم اغفر لنا ذنوبنا ولوالدينا وارحمهم كما ربونا صغارا ولجميع المسلمين والمسلمات ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. Ya Allah, Engkau pemilik sekalian alam yang bagimu jua segala kebesaran dan kekuasaan. Kehadratmu puji dan syukur kami rafa'kan dengan iradahmu dan limpah keizinan. Majlis Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz yang bersejarah ini berjaya dilangsungkan. Allahumma ya Hannan ya Mannan, kepadamu segala kesyukuran kami sembahkan atas keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz ibni almarhum Tuanku Munawir Cancelor UKM, dan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Aisyah Rohani binti almarhum Tengku Besar Mahmud. Engkau limpahilah rahmat dan keampunanmu kepada duli-duli tuanku dan putera-putera yang mulia. Kurniakanlah taufik dan inayahmu kepada pimpinan tertinggi UKM dan warganya, dan seluruh hamba-hambamu yang turut serta dalam majlis ini. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, jadikanlah negara Malaysia sebagai negara yang maju dengan rakyat yang teguh bersatu padu. Hindarilah negara kami dari segala fitnah yang memecah belahkan kami dan bala bencana yang memusnahkan segala kemajuan yang dibina. Allahumma ansurna ma'asyiral ummatil islamiyah wahdina wasiddidna khairal bariyah. Allahumma kun lana wa li hadzal biladi hafizan min jami'il balaya wa dafi'an 'anna wa 'anhum jami'ar razaya. وانصرنا على الأعداء والحساد واحلل غضبك ونقمتك على البغي والفساد. اللهم احرس بعينك التي لا تنام واكنف بكنفك وركنك الذي لا يرام. اللهم ارم راية الإسلام منشورة ومواطن الدين والحق معمورة. اللهم اختم لنا بخاتمة السعادة واجعلنا من الذين لهم الحسنى وزيادة بجاه سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ذي الشفاعة وعلى آله وصحبه ذوي السعادة. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. تقبل الله.
Majlis merakamkan ucapan terima kasih atas bacaan doa sebentar tadi. Meneruskan atur cara, sama-sama kita saksikan tayangan multimedia. Kita saksikan bersama.
Ampun Tuanku, titah Duli Yang Maha Mulia Yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz Ibn Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Tuanku Cancelor. Untuk itu, majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Profesor Dato Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali untuk menyembah sila memohon perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Cancelor untuk menyampaikan titah sempena syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz. Majlis dengan hormat takzimnya mempersilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Beta bersyukur kehadrat Allah Subhanahu wa taala kerana dengan izinnya beta dan Tunku Ampuan Besar dapat berangkat ke majlis syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz pada pagi ini. Beta mengucapkan tahniah kepada Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia yang telah berjaya menganjurkan syarahan berprestij ini buat kali pertama dengan kerjasama Kelab Alumni Aberystwyth University, Malaysia. Beta berbangga UKM terus menerajui pembinaan kelestarian institusi dan tadbir urus yang cekap berpandukan pengalaman dan kepakaran UKM yang melibatkan penyelidikan dan program-program akademik di peringkat kebangsaan, serantau dan antarabangsa. Sebagai universiti penyelidikan, UKM mempunyai tanggungjawab besar untuk mendukung amanah melestarikan ilmu dan menjuarai penyelesaian terhadap permasalahan yang melanda negara dan masyarakat sejagat. Pelaksanaan tadbir urus universiti juga tidak seharusnya memfokuskan kepada tadbir urus korporat semata-mata, tetapi juga melihat kepada keperluan tadbir urus insan dalam melestarikan sesebuah institusi. Dalam konteks ini, kualiti dalaman graduan yang dihasilkan mestilah mempunyai kekuatan spiritual yang boleh membawa kepada pertimbangan yang baik dalam memastikan kelestarian institusi yang bakal dipimpin kelak. Beta telah memperkenankan siri syarahan ini untuk diadakan dengan matlamat agar ia menjadi mercu kepada keserjanaan melalui wacana keilmuan yang dapat memberi penyelesaian berkesan terhadap pelbagai persoalan. Siri syarahan ini juga diharap akan terus memperkaya pelbagai korpus ilmu yang dapat membawa impak besar dan positif kepada kehidupan masyarakat di Malaysia dan dunia melalui perkongsian ilmu yang meluas oleh tokoh serta sarjana ternama. Untuk siri pertama syarahan Cancelor pada pagi ini, beta sukacita dapat mendengar syarahan yang bakal disampaikan oleh tokoh ternama negara, Tan Sri, Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz. Beta menzahirkan ucapan perhargaan atas kesudian Tan Sri Zeti menerima pelawaan UKM menjadi pengucap tamu diraja yang pertama bagi siri syarahan ini yang bertajuk Building Sustainable Institutions, Good Governance Matters. Pengalaman luas beliau selama 16 tahun sebagai Gabenor Bank Negara dengan gabungan kepakaran di bidang pengurusan kewangan dan tadbir urus telah membawa Bank Negara Malaysia keluar daripada beberapa episod krisis kewangan utama dunia. Berbekalan Berbekalkan pengalaman ini, Dato percaya beliau adalah individu yang layak dalam membicarakan tentang topik kelestarian institusi dan memberi perspektif baru kepada masyarakat melalui kupasan beliau dalam syarahan ini. Isu kelestarian institusi wajar dilihat di dalam skop yang luas dan besar. Komitmen setiap warga juga diperlukan untuk memperteguh serta memelihara kelestarian setiap institusi yang menjadi tunjang kepada kegemilangan sesebuah negara. Setiap organisasi, bermula dari sekecil-kecil organisasi di dalam masyarakat, membawa kepada pelbagai institusi awam maupun persendirian atau swasta, perlu melihat beri pentingnya isu kelestarian ini bukan sahaja untuk memastikan sesebuah institusi tersebut terus kekal relevan, tetapi turut mempunyai kelangsungan untuk melahirkan kepimpinan dan warga yang berkualiti, yang berpegang teguh kepada nilai-nilai murni yang luhur seperti berintegriti, bersopan santun dan berakhlak mulia. Dato yakin apabila warga sesebuah institusi ini mempunyai jati diri dan nilai kepribadian yang tinggi sebagai pegangan, mereka akan memandu serta membentuk sistem tadbir urus yang baik bagi institusi tersebut. Ini secara langsung akan membendung kemerosatan nilai dan standard di dalam sesebuah institusi untuk memastikan ia terus kokoh serta dinamik mengikut keperluan dan keadaan semasa. Lebih-lebih lagi bagi institusi yang bertindak sebagai badan kawal selia dan badan penguatkuasaan seperti institusi kerajaan, bank negara, polis, suruhanjaya dan lain-lain institusi. Kelestarian melalui tadbir urus yang baik ini akan menjamin institusi yang berada di bawah tanggungjawab penyeliaan dan penguatkuasaannya berfungsi mengikut matlamat penubuhan, berlandaskan piawaian, peraturan dan undang-undang yang berkuasa. Institusi persendirian atau swasta juga tidak terlepas dengan tanggungjawab tadbir urus yang baik ini, kerana mereka adalah sebahagian daripada rantaian yang membentuk sebuah institusi yang lebih besar, iaitu negara ini. Jika sesebuah institusi tidak ditadbir urus dengan baik, nescaya institusi ini akan runtuh. Dato berharap ilmu dan pengalaman yang dikongsi melalui siri syarahan ini kelak akan memberi manfaat untuk kelestarian sebuah kehidupan yang cemerlang dan diberkati. Sekian, wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Menjunjung kasih Tuanku, majlis pada pagi ini diteruskan dengan pidato pengenalan pengucap tamu diraja Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz. Untuk itu, majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Profesor Dato Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Naib Chancellor UKM untuk mengadap dan memohon perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor bagi menyampaikan pidato pengenalan pengucap tamu diraja. Majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan salam sejahtera. Menghadap ke bawah duli yang maha mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Menghadap ke bawah duli yang maha mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Aisyah Rohani binti Almarhum Tengku Besar Mahmud. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun. Sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik bagi pihak pengurusan tertinggi dan warga UKM menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku berdua berangkat mencemar duli ke syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz ini. Sesungguhnya keberangkatan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku berdua merupakan satu perhormatan yang tinggi buat patik serta seluruh warga Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Patik dan seluruh warga Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia juga menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku Chancellor untuk UKM menganjurkan siri syarahan yang berprestis ini dan menamakan syarahan ini sebagai Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz. Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz ini adalah pengiktirafan kesarjanaan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku Chancellor atas persembahan ijazah kehormat Doktor Undang-Undang oleh University of South Wales, Fellow kehormat oleh Aberystwyth University dan Fellow kehormat oleh Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. Syarahan ini juga melambangkan kemuncak penghormatan tertinggi UKM atas naungan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku Chancellor kepada UKM dalam melestarikan ilmu untuk meningkatkan perkembangan pendidikan tinggi negara. Ampun Tuanku, patik seterusnya memohon limpah perkenan duli yang maha mulia Tuanku untuk patik mengalu-alukan hadirin sekalian dan meneruskan ucapan patik dalam bahasa Inggeris. Ampun Tuanku. Yang amat berhormat Datuk Seri Utama Haji Muhammad Haji Hassan, Menteri Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, dan Yang Mulia Raja Datin Seri Salbiah Tengku Nujumuddin, Yang amat mulia Tunku Besar Seri Menanti Tunku Ali Ridauddin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang amat berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji Abdul Hamid Pro-Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz, Pengucap Tama Diraja Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz, Yang amat mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tengku Muhriz, Yang mulia kerabat diraja, Yang berhormat ahli-ahli Majlis Kerajaan Negeri Sembilan, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Dr. Ibrahim Saad, Pengerusi Lembaga Pengarah UKM, Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Datuk Sri Utama Asyad Ayub, Pengasas Kelab Alumni Universiti Aberystwyth, Dev-Dev kehormat, ahli-ahli jawatan kuasa dan para alumni Kelab Alumni Universiti Aberystwyth di Malaysia, ahli-ahli lembaga pengarah UKM, timbalan-timbalan Naib Chancellor dan pegawai pengurusan utama UKM, warga UKM, serta hadirin dan hadirat yang dihormati sekalian. Thank you for being here today for the inaugural Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture. The Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz Lecture offers a prestigious platform for leading figures of society to share their knowledge and experience with the academia, captains of industry, and the public on issues of particular relevance and importance. Today's inaugural lecture also commemorates the conferment upon His Royal Highness the Honorary Doctorate of Law by the University of South Wales, Honorary Fellowship by Aberystwyth University, and Honorary Fellowship by the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. These awards are in recognition of His Royal Highness' wide experience in public and corporate affairs, as well as His Royal Highness' dedication in the development of higher education in the country. Befitting the area of interest of His Royal Highness Tuanku Muhriz, on whose patronage this lecture series is sponsored, the focus of the inaugural lecture today will be on good governance in public and corporate affairs. We are blessed to have with us today Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz. Her advocacy of good governance makes her the ideal choice as the inaugural speaker of this lecture series. Tan Sri Zeti needs no introduction. Her illustrious and memorable 16 years tenure at the globally respected Governor of Bank Negara speaks for itself. However, duty demands that I formally highlight Tan Sri's noble contribution to society and why the university is honored to have her speak to us today. Tan Sri Zeti was the 7th Governor of Bank Negara Malaysia, Malaysia's Central Bank, from 2000 to 2016. She was the second longest serving governor after Tun Ismail Ali and the first woman appointed to that post. In pursuit of governance, Tan Sri Zeti spearheaded key reforms such as the independence of the central bank, as well as the competitiveness and resilience of the financial sector. Much to her credit, the financial services sector and the economy have remained buoyant against external shocks. Malaysia is the global Islamic finance powerhouse, and one of its key architects is Tan Sri Zeti. Her chief contribution was her profound thought leadership and capacity development in the Islamic finance industry that was then in uncharted territory. In firming Malaysia's position in Islamic finance, Tan Sri Zeti set up the International Center for Education in Islamic Finance, or INSEF, the Islamic Financial Services Board, IFSB, and the International Islamic Liquidity Management Corporation, IILM. To further strengthen the Sharia Foundation, Tan Sri Zeti established the International Sharia Research Academy, ISRA. Perhaps the most fundamental transformative effect of Tan Sri Zeti was the development and enforcement of the Islamic Financial Services Act 2013, or IFSA. Combined, these institutions have forged a conducive ecosystem that has accelerated the development of the nation as a leading global hub in Islamic finance, even as it inspires many countries toward adopting Malaysia's model of Islamic finance. Continuing her institution building streak, Tan Sri Zeti pioneered the International Center for Leadership in Finance, or ICLIF, for the purpose of nurturing world-class professionals. Tan Sri spearheaded a similar culture at Bank Negara that promoted high performance and next practice thinking. This culture has made Bank Negara what it is today, world-class. Tan Sri Zeti was also instrumental in developing the highly acclaimed Financial Sector Master Plan 2000 to 2010 and the Financial Sector Blueprint 2011 to 2020. These plans have fundamentally enhanced the competitiveness of the financial services sector amid heightened global competition. She is instrumental in the transformational initialize of the Central Banking Act 2009. The Act entrenched the central bank's independence and objectivity. Global peers have recognized the wide-ranging reforms undertaken by Bank Negara under her transformational leadership to be among the best globally. In 2010, the world-renowned Global Finance magazine named her as one of the world's best central bank chief. Additionally, that magazine gave Tan Sri grade A among 50 central bank governors for a record of 11 consecutive times. In 2010 too, the Washington-based publication Emerging Markets adjudged Tan Sri Zeti as the Central Bank Governor of the Year. She was also honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award for her tireless effort to promote Islamic finance worldwide. In 2010 too, she was named Tokoh Ma'al Hijrah 1432 Hijrah at the national level Ma'al Hijrah celebration. Doubtless, given her exemplary career, Tan Sri's presence among us today enhances the stature of Chancellor Tuanku Muhriz lecture, even as it sets the tone for those that will follow in the several years ahead. Therefore, with all due honor, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia present Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz to deliver her lecture on building sustainable institutions, good governance matters. Ampun Tuanku, sekian sahaja sembah ucapan patik. Patik sekali lagi bagi pihak warga UKM menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua berangkat mencemar duli ke Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz. Sesungguhnya keberangkatan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua akan menjadi kenangan terindah buat patik sekalian. Patik sekalian mendoakan semoga Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala melanjutkan usia zaman Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua serta putra-putra di dalam keadaan sihat walafiat dan kekal memerintah di atas tahta kerajaan Negeri Sembilan dengan penuh keadilan dan kebijaksanaan. Menjunjung kasih Tuanku. Sekian, wabillahi taufik wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Para hadirin yang dihormati sekalian, sekarang majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz untuk menyampaikan syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz, Building Sustainable Institution, Good Governance Matters. Dengan segala hormatnya, dipersilakan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Menghadap ke bawah Duli Yang Maha Mulia Yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Muhriz Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Munawir, Chancellor Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Menghadap ke bawah Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus Tuanku Asyah Rohani binti Almarhum Tunku Besar Mahmud. Ampun Tuanku, beribu-ribu ampun, sembah patik mohon diampun. Patik menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua berangkat mencemar duli ke Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz ini. Patik menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Cancelor untuk patik menjadi pengucap tama yang pertama bagi Seri Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz. Ampun Tuanku. Patik seterusnya memohon limpah perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku untuk patik mengalu-alukan hadirin sekalian dan meneruskan ucapan patik dalam bahasa Inggeris. Ampun Tuanku. Yang amat berbahagia, yang amat berhormat Datuk Seri Utama Haji Muhammad Haji Hassan, Menteri Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus, dan Yang Mulia Raja Datin Seri Salbiah Tengku Nujumuddin, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Besar Seri Menanti Tunku Ali Rizauddin Ibni Tunku Muhriz, Yang Amat Berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji, Pro-Chancellor UKM, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Zain Al-Abidin Ibni Tuanku Muhriz, Yang Amat Berhormat Ahli-Ahli Majlis Mesyuarat Kerajaan Negeri Sembilan, Yang Amat Berbahagia Tun Ahmad Sarji Abdul Hamid, Pro-Chancellor UKM, Yang Berbahagia Profesor Datuk Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Naib Chancellor, Dev Kehormat, Ahli Lembaga Pengarah UKM, Timbalan Naib Chancellor dan Pegawai Pengurusan Utama UKM, warga UKM serta hadirin dan hadirat yang dihormati sekalian. Building sustainable national and commercial institutions is central to supporting the economic advancement of nations. It is integral to the creation of an environment for the effective functioning of an economy that in turn will allow for the efficient use of resources. It is pivotal to any economic success. While building institutions may be an arduous task in itself, the building of strong institutions that are relevant in a rapidly changing environment is even more challenging. Not only is the highly dynamic and fast-changing economic landscape having a significant impact on corporations and institutions, but it has rendered the operating environment to become uncertain, unpredictable, and unstable. The demand is therefore for strong institutions that are able to withstand the changing character of the economic cycle that has brought with it great uncertainties and extreme conditions. Such strengthened institutions will have a fundamental role in achieving an enduring economy. Building sustainable institutions is therefore something that needs to be done if we are to prepare the ground for our future generations. While institution building encompasses several elements that are important, the focus of this lecture is on governance. It is fundamental to ensuring sustainability of corporations and organizations. Institutional building needs to involve strong governance to provide the structural foundation necessary to not only achieve success but also survival in the more challenging of times. Governance essentially is about how such organizations and institutions are being governed. For the private sector, corporate governance is about the management arrangements and holding those with decision-making powers to be accountable. In the public sector, it not only concerns the governance of the operations of public corporations, but also the governance arrangements for policy decision making. The global experience over the recent 2 decades has highlighted the consequences and costs of governance failures. In the case of the larger corporations and entities, such governance failures have witnessed large-scale destruction in wealth, collapse of financial markets, and the erosion of confidence that has resulted in costs that are detrimental to the economy of a country. Weak governance in both the private and public sectors have resulted in poor investment decisions, excessive risk-taking, and irregular practices. In the public sector, the consequences of getting it wrong is even greater, given the repercussions are far-reaching across the entire nation. The role of strong and sound governance in the modern economy is therefore immense. Its consequences signifies its importance and the imperative for good governance. The coverage of this lecture will be first to discuss the narrow and broader context of what is meant by good governance in the private and public sectors, and to proceed to elaborate on the nature of governance failures and its consequences and costs. The lecture will then discuss key elements in the design of governance arrangements and the ensuing issues that need to be addressed. Sound governance needs to encompass aspects that are beyond having checks and balance mechanisms, but that which also incorporates the values of the corporation, in particular the culture of integrity and ethics. This provides the foundations for doing what is right, and given the dynamic nature of our current and future environment, governance arrangements will also need to evolve to reflect the new emerging realities. Governance is about the process of governing. It is about who has the authority in decision making and the accountability that is associated with this power. It is also about how others are able to make their voice be taken into account. Governance arrangements are necessary whenever a group comes together to achieve a specific objective or to resolve a collective problem. Such governance arrangements provides the rules for governing. The most formal governance is that which determines how a country functions. The Dictionary of Public Management and Governance defines it as the relationship between governments and citizens that enable public policies and programs to be formulated, implemented, and evaluated. In the broader context, it refers to the rules, institutions, and networks that determine how a country or an organization functions. While this definition remains relevant, the shifting landscape and transformation that has occurred in our operating environment has required for governance arrangements to evolve accordingly to reflect the new realities of the world that we live in. Governance thus refers to the manner in which rules and standards are structured and regulated. Governance may take different forms and different degree of formality depending on their different motivations. Corporate governance can be defined as a framework of rules and practices by which a board of directors ensures accountability, fairness, and transparency in a company's relationship with its stakeholders. The stakeholders here not only includes the shareholders, being the owners of the corporation, but also the employees, creditors, competitors, regulators, financiers, customers, the government, and the community at large which it serves. But while corporate governance does not have a one-size-fits-all solution, good corporate governance requires a fundamental buy-in, an inner conviction that manifests itself in the form of three fundamental duties that are entrusted upon those with the oversight of corporations in the private sector. The fundamental standard for regulators is to require the duties of care, loyalty, and candor. The duty of care means that those in charge of corporate oversight, namely the board of directors, the officers of the corporation, and the external auditors, and many others charged with ensuring proper governance, must do their homework. They must be diligent, they need to be informed, they must be attentive, and they must be vigilant. Not some of the time, not most of the time, but at all times. The duty of loyalty in turn means that those parties concerned must always put the institution's interests first, and certainly ahead of their own self-interest. This is because corporations may be confronted by external agents that do not have the decision-making authority, but that are able to influence the governing process. This may include lobby or pressure groups that have vested interests. And finally, it is the duty of candor, which means being candid, honest, transparent. The shareholders have a need to know, and they have an absolute right to know. And those entrusted with oversight of corporate governance need to disclose and state it like it is. The Asian Corporate Governance Association, the ACGA, which does a country ranking of the general climate of governance across Asian countries every 2 years, uses a number of specific criteria to measure the level of corporate governance. The first criteria is on the existence of corporate governance rules and practices which are benchmarked against international best practices. This includes both the financial and non-financial reporting standards in a country. In Malaysia, the first Code of Corporate Governance was released in the year 2000, and the most recent revisions is expected to be rolled out later this year or early 2017. The second criteria used is on enforcement, on how rules and practices are monitored and enforced in a country. This is measured by whether the country has a successful record of prosecuting cases of irregular practices, with focus in particular on insider trading and market manipulation. This is because of its direct and proximate violation of the duty of loyalty. When insiders take advantage of market imperfections to trade for their own benefit, they are doing so at the direct expense of other shareholders whose interests are supposed to be looked after. Such violations are serious violations of trust. Regulators have continued to bring the full weight of the law to bear on such violations. The third criterion looks at, when measuring the level of governance in the country, is the political and regulatory environment. Under this criteria, the ACGA assess whether there is a clear, consistent, and credible policy that supports governance, and that ensures a high level of commitment to professionalism and ethics in the corporations and institutions of a country. The fourth criteria emphasized by AGCA is the existence of an internationally generally accepted accounting practices in the country, while the fifth criteria is on the corporate governance culture which is instilled within institutions. The culture that here is based on the spirit rather than letter of the law to ensure that boards of corporation have a deep understanding of the risks and activities of an institution so as to be able to provide the strategic direction and to be better able to engage with the management. When looking at institutions per se, the ACGA reviews for discipline, transparency, independence, responsibility and fairness. In other words, it is candor, care and loyalty again. Institutions must demonstrate that they are carrying out their clearly defined core business, are transparent in their reporting and in their announcements made to the general public. They must encourage and exemplify independence in governance and management and have boards who advocate fairness and transparency in business dealings. In 2014, Malaysia was ranked 4th place together with Thailand and has seen to be the only country that has been improving in corporate governance scores. However, in the most recent ranking that was released just a week ago, Malaysia's ranking slipped down to the 6th place. Turning now to the governance and accountabilities of the public sector. The role and accountabilities of the public sector differs distinctly from the private sector. While public institutions need to ensure their viability, such organizations also have national goals to be achieved or a social mission. Thus, unlike in the private sector, financial measures are generally not the indicator of performance of such agencies in the public sector. In addition, the actions taken by the public sector may have far-reaching implications on the entire spectrum of businesses and on the economic well-being of the public at large. Certain actions taken may even have implications on other countries, given the greater international interdependence that prevails in our current environment. The accountability of the public sector is therefore immense. History has shown that mismanagement can damage a nation, resulting in high costs to the people of the country. In contrast, well-managed nations have brought great prosperity to its people. Being in the public sector is all about bringing value and benefits to its citizens. Such benefits can include improved housing, education, health, and transportation. It may also include the eradication of poverty, the reduction in crime, and environment sustainability. In the current environment of greater transparency and enhanced communication, there is greater awareness of the prevailing circumstances. This has produced high levels of expectation. It has also reduced the tolerance for inefficiency, poor governance, irregular practices, and the non-delivery of results. The expectations are for the public sector that it best serves the nation and for delivery of the expected results in the most efficient manner. In so doing, public trust and accountability is imperative to ensure that the goals are achieved in a manner that commands the respect of those being served by the organization, thereby reinforcing the viability of such institutions. Similar to the private sector, the public sector is confronted with a dynamic environment of rapid change. Governance arrangements, therefore, have produced previous successes may now be no longer relevant or effective. In addition, with the increased complexity in the functioning of the economy, it has now become the cumulative efforts of several parts of the public sector to produce a desired specific result. Thus, the actions taken can no longer depend on one specific part of the system, but on the collaboration and collective efforts of several parts of the system to address the new challenges that have become more complex. This will then require governance arrangements for such collaboration. It will also require new tools and systems to support such collaboration. The role of the leadership and governance in the public sector has thus changed significantly. As with corporations in the private sector, such public organizations need to be evolved and transformed, and with it the governance arrangements to meet the changing requirements in the new environment. Turning now to the consequences and cost of governance failures. The corporate scandals and the global financial crises that have occupied the media pages in these recent 2 decades have shown that regulators, auditors, lawyers and shareholders need to remain vigilant to mitigate the risk of divergent interests between shareholders and managers. While this so-called principal agent problem has been studied extensively in academic circles, it seems to have surfaced time and again during this period. The costs of governance failures may also become widespread in the system arising from the greater financial interconnectivity that has increased the channels through which financial stress in one corporation or institution can spread to the rest of the financial system and to the overall economy. It may also evolve into a financial crisis. The experience has shown that such governance failures in the financial sector have resulted in the destruction of wealth on an enormous scale, with plummeting share prices and losses in shareholders' confidence. The consequent costs are not only to the corporations concerned, but to the overall economy. In the recent global financial crisis, the disruption in the intermediation process and the adverse impact on the real economy has been unprecedented, resulting in wide-ranging policy responses, including those that have never been contemplated. The economic contraction and the protracted recovery, including the loss of growth potential, are all consequences of the depth and magnitude of the financial crisis. History has shown us that there has been countless incidents of such governance failures in both the corporate and financial sectors. These have resulted in large bankruptcies, often followed by massive litigation, company closures, and fines imposed by regulators. In 1991, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, that is BCCI, money laundering and widespread fraud that was exposed resulted in bankruptcy and debts owed to creditors amounting to more than £10 billion. The collapse of BCCI had effects which reverberated for more than a decade afterwards. It spurred the reform of corporate governance, in the United Kingdom that gave focus on the close monitoring of the management of companies and of their activities. 10 years later, in 2001, the world witnessed the bankruptcy of Enron in the United States, following accounting fraud and excessive risk-taking. The energy traders' unfathomable accounts that obscured huge debts in its off-balance sheet. Once these were revealed, the company imploded, wiping out $74 billion of shareholders' value and the pensions and jobs of thousands of employees. The collapse of Enron also caused its auditors, then an audit giant, Arthur Andersen, to collapse. In 2002, Tyco International, a company incorporated in Ireland and headquartered in New Jersey in the United States, saw 2 senior officers of the company being found guilty of more than 30 separate violations, including the stealing of more than $150 million from the company. Following several trials, it resulted in prison sentences of up to 25 years. The company also had to pay $3 billion to a class of US dollars to a class of defrauded shareholders, and it should be said, to their lawyers. In late 2011, a $1.7 billion fraud was unearthed at Olympus. In 2012, the scandal developed into one of the biggest and longest-lived financial scandal in the history of corporate Japan. The scandal wiped 75 to 80% of the company's stock valuation, which led to the resignation of much of the board. Investigations across Japan, the United States, and the United Kingdom, and the arrests of 11 previous and current directors, senior managers, auditors, and bankers of Olympus for alleged criminal activities and cover-up. It raised considerable concern over the prevailing corporate governance and transparency in the country. At about the same time, the corporation shed 2,700 jobs, 7% of its workforce, and announced the closure of around 40% of its 30 manufacturing plants by 2015 to reduce its unsustainable costs. To go on, in 2012, news of JP Morgan's London Wales trades amounting to $6.2 billion in investment funds hit the banking fraternity. The huge losses was blamed on a single trader who maintained that the execution of the trading strategy had been initiated and had been approved, mandated and monitored by the investment office, including the chief investment officer and the senior management. This scandal attracted penalties from 4 different regulators and prompted the implementation of the Volcker rule that now greatly limits the higher risk hedge fund style proprietary trading by commercial banks. To put all this into context, it highlights how expensive governance failures can be. We can see this in perspective in the comparison of the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008, which wiped out $691 billion, and the Tohoku disaster in Japan, which cost the country $380 billion. When governance failures occur, not only is there a loss in financial terms, but there is the added loss of reputation and the dire task of rebuilding trust. These governance failures have highlighted the important role that governance has in the sustainability of institutions. While it is very much depends on sound governance processes that are instilled and formalized in clear, structured and well-defined frameworks, the recent decade of governance failures have prompted reviews and reassessments of the structures needed to produce high quality and sound governance arrangements. Fundamental to a governance framework are the systems, structures and processes that is reinforced by culture and values by which the levels of authority are defined. It also includes the systems of checks and balances to ensure that those in position of authority are monitored and their activities and their effectiveness are being measured. A large part of the governance framework relates to the functioning of the board. Institutions need to consider the size and composition of the board, taking into account the diversity and dynamics in the boardroom. Boards should have a size which warrants and encourages engagement and debate of issues. The prospective director admitted to the board needs to have a sound understanding of the business of the corporation or institution, the nature of its risks, and its strategic direction. The director, therefore, needs to have the capacity to think strategically about the institution, its value proposition, and its competitive and comparative advantage, and thus contribute to the ongoing evolution of its central idea and strategic vision of the corporation. The demands are for tangible contributions without veering into operational detail and for ensuring the internal and external risks of the corporation are adequately identified, monitored and managed. An important part of the governance framework is thus a robust assessment and risk management framework. Risk assessment and risk management framework that is consistent with the risk profile of the corporation and the risk appetite of the shareholders. This should be reinforced by a system of sound internal controls embedded in the operations of the institution. A board should have diversity in representation as reflected in experience, functional expertise, ethnicity, and gender. For example, in today's world of social media and technology, increasingly boards are recruiting IT specialists and IT-savvy people on their boards to address the issue of cyber security and advancements in technology. Countries around the globe are also calling for boards to have increased number of women directors. It's diversity of all kinds, including gender diversity, that is seen as a positive force. The right mix of a given board, of course, differs from one institution to another. The quality of governance in an institution is unquestionably affected by the dynamics of the boardroom. It should allow for dissent to be freely voiced without hostile, confrontational or disrespect. Boards, however, can be dysfunctional, especially when they have dominant personalities on the board. The chairman of the board is an integral part of the governance framework and must be able to command the respect and be able to facilitate discussions to ensure thorough discussions on issues before decisions are made. Another key aspect of governance framework are the committees of the board. Every board should have audit committee, a risk committee, a remuneration committee, and a nomination committee where the majority of the members of these committees consists of independent directors. These committees have a key role and important responsibility which contribute to the successful functioning of the board. These elements discussed are now integral in the governance arrangements of Bank Negara Malaysia. In the Central Banking Act, which had been rewritten and enacted by Parliament in the year 2009, the role of the board was significantly enhanced to incorporate all the above arrangements and elements. The new legislation also gave clarity to all the major outcomes to be delivered by the bank. In the year 2000, when Bank Negara Malaysia embarked on an organizational transformation, these strategic outcomes had already been socialized throughout the entire organization. In the years that followed, governance arrangements were also put in place for the decision-making process for all the important mandates of the bank, including for monetary stability and financial stability and for reserve management. These arrangements were to a significant extent institutionalized in the new legislation. As part of the governance arrangements, the board at the bank not only monitors and assesses the performance of the bank against its mandate, but it assesses the extent to which the spectrum of risks that have been identified and managed. The governance committee of the board also has an important role relating to the appointment of key positions, including the external members to the bank's policy committees. As an organization that started with solid foundations, these enhancements have strengthened the capacity and capability of the bank to effectively function in a now highly different environment in which organizational resilience has become important and an important imperative. While it is important to focus on what the corporation does and the key elements of the governance framework, equally important is the corporate culture of an organization. Having a comprehensive governance framework is insufficient. It needs to be reviewed by the elements of a positive corporate culture and values. The tone from the top is especially crucial to the implementation of a clear culture, not only of integrity and ethics, but also meaningful core corporate values that are grounded by the principles that will guide the company's actions. The ECLIF Leadership and Governance Center, which had been mentioned earlier, which was established by Bank Negara Malaysia more than 10 years ago, defines this culture as what people do when no one is watching. Employees of an institution should essentially perform their daily functions with integrity without having to be told to do so. There should be clear-cut policies and procedures within an institution to encourage, propagate, and reward ethical behavior. Leaders within such institutions should also lead by example, always displaying the highest level of integrity and ethics when making decisions and in all matters of the business. Governance failures experienced in our contemporary environment has in fact prompted increased attention to be accorded to integrity and ethics in business and for it to be a part of the governance structure. In essence, how a business achieves its results must take into account its core values. High ethical standards need to be incorporated into the governance framework. Questions such as, is it right? Is it in accordance with the core values and principles of what the organization stands for? Is it in the interest of the community being served? And will it be detrimental to the overall economy? And the future generations are all important in questions that need to be asked. Putting this into practice will, however, require strong leadership and vigilance to address violations of these values. Here, allow me to read to you two quotations, one from the West and one from the East, that is relevant to this cause. From the West, it is from a quote from Abraham Lincoln. He states, "I'm not bound to win, but I'm bound to be true. I'm not bound to succeed, but I'm bound to live by the light that I have. I must stand with anybody that stands right and stand with him while he is right, and part with him when he goes wrong." And the second quote from the East, I've taken from Mahatma Gandhi. "A no uttered from the deepest conviction is better and greater than a yes merely uttered to please, or what is worse, to avoid trouble." He went on to say, "You must change that you wish to see the world. You must be the change that you wish to see in the world." In addition to the values of ethics and integrity, corporations and public organizations may promote other values, including those that support their brand. Promoted throughout the organization, it makes it known what the organization stands for and how it conducts itself to produce the desired outcomes. For Bank Negara Malaysia, the corporate values of integrity and ethics were values that were instilled by the bank's founders when the bank was first established. The elements of this culture of being whiter than white, being tireless in the pursuit of excellence, and to act professionally at all times. These values have continued through the decades to be upheld. In the more contemporary environment, these core values have been reinforced to also include the culture of having a sense of urgency so that problems are resolved before they happen. Being preemptive is vital for a policy decision-making authority. This is particularly important in a rapidly changing environment. This sense of urgency, however, is far from being impulsive and having knee-jerk reactions, which are dangerous, but rather that the governance process elaborated earlier ensures that there's a robust decision-making process that takes into account the entire spectrum of risks that could derail the potential to achieve the desired outcomes. A second, more recent core value important to the bank is a culture of collaboration across the entire organization. The silo approach has been replaced by horizontal collaboration given the increased interconnectedness and interdependency in the world that we are now operating in. While the bank has always had the culture of dependability and dedication, a more recent culture has also been promoted has been self-motivation. This culture has contributed to self-development and has significantly raised the quality of the talent in the bank, thus enhancing their contribution to the bank's desired outcomes. Conscious efforts have been made to integrate all these values into every system of the bank to strengthen the core values of the organization. Finally, let me touch on the evolution of governance in a dynamic environment. Given the highly dynamic environment, governance arrangements need to evolve to reflect the new realities of the world we live in, It needs to take into account the shifting landscape and the new risks that have become more complex and integrated. The transformation has been particularly pronounced in the financial sector. Following the lapses that emerged during the financial crisis, the subsequent regulatory reforms have been wide-ranging. Among the fundamental reforms is the shift from a rule-based regulation to a principle-based regulation. These have now been widely implemented the world over, including in Malaysia. In parallel with this is the transition towards a more principle-based versus rule-based governance regime. This approach focuses on outcomes that matter. The prescription of rules and its compliance has given way to a more flexible approach in which a broad set of principles are set out by the regulatory authority, giving the regulated entities room to determine the manner in which it is to be implemented. Similarly, in corporate governance, a principle-based system thus allows for greater flexibility in the governance process. Corporate culture is an important element in this arrangement. Research has shown that intrinsic motivation that is driven by values is more important in promoting behavior than extrinsic factors. The rules-based approach has been criticized as simply a box-ticking exercise where those applying the rules simply check the boxes to say that they have applied the rules without understanding the process and consequence of applying them. The principles-based approach, however, requires organizations applying them to discuss and put them in practice throughout their own set of standard operating practices. This indirectly forces the management of the organization to understand and apply them more rigorously and thoroughly. Additionally, boards are also required to endorse these standard operating policies, which mean that they are accountable for them and responsible. While the principles-based regulation may be seen as one which has uncertainties, in a system that is flexible, it is a system that is flexible and scalable to the size of the organization applying it. The principles-based regulation regime can also evolve as the organization evolves, whether in size or extending into new areas of activities. The principles-based regulation regime takes into account the management and employees' intrinsic values and moral judgments, which serves as an ethical compass in managerial decision-making. Finally, allow me to say in conclusion something about the Asian region which Malaysia is very much a part of. Our region has continued to be an important growth center in the global economy. The region has, however, not been immune to the turbulence and upheavals taking place in different parts of the world. The region has, however, demonstrated time and again the ability to make a swift rebound. Nevertheless, this should not lull us into complacency. As we advance forward and as we aspire to become more developed, our economies will also become more complex and sophisticated. The capability of our institutions and organizations need to be strengthened and the governance arrangements to be commensurate with the developments unfolding. Recognizing this, Asia needs to draw lessons from the developed world in institutional building and the need to avoid the governance weaknesses that have emerged. Some of the global regulatory reforms in response to these lapses have been harsh. As emerging economies in the Asian region, We need to pursue the middle ground and that which is contextualized to our environment. But there's no question on the need to provide assurance of sound governance practices if we are to draw meaningful international participation in our economies. There's tremendous potential for our country and our region. It will, however, require strong political stamina to provide the strong foundations for our prospects to be realized. To reiterate, while this agenda will involve many elements to build strong and sustainable institutions, it will be governance that matters. Ampun Tuanku, sekian saja sembah ucapan patik. Patik sekali lagi menjunjung setinggi-tinggi kasih atas sudi perkenaan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua berangkat mencemah Duli ke Syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz ini. Patik sekalian mendoa semoga Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala melanjutkan usia zaman Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku berdua serta putera di dalam keadaan sihat walafiat dan kekal memerintah di atas takhta Kerajaan Negeri Sembilan dengan penuh keadilan dan kebijaksanaan. Menjunjung kasih Tuanku, sekian terima kasih.
Majlis merakamkan ucapan terima kasih kepada Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz. Ampun Tuanku. Sebagai tanda penghargaan kepada Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz, majlis dengan segala hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Profesor Dato Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Naib Chancellor, untuk menyembah sila memohon perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor menyampaikan cenderamata penghargaan kepada Yang Berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Sri Dr. Zeti Akhtar Aziz.
Seterusnya, sebagai tanda penghargaan dan menjunjung kasih atas perkenan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor, majlis dengan hormatnya mempersilakan Yang Berbahagia Profesor Dato Dr. Nur Azlan Ghazali, Naib Chancellor, untuk menyembahkan cendera kenangan kepada Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tuanku Chancellor. Dengan hormat takzimnya dipersilakan. Menjunjung kasih Tuanku.
Dengan sembahan cendera kenangan itu tadi, maka sempurnalah syarahan Cancelor Tuanku Muhriz pada pagi ini. Ampun Tuanku. Duli Yang Maha Mulia yang di-Pertuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus dan Duli Yang Maha Mulia Tunku Ampuan Besar Negeri Sembilan Darul Khusus berangkat keluar Dewan.